I saw Babygirl yesterday and I feel incapable of not discussing it. I don't do videos like this a lot where I don't script, so expect my thoughts to be poorly formed, however earnest, and hopefully still of some interest to you. So Babygirl is a 2024 film that has just come out here in Australia. It was written and directed by Dutch filmmaker Helena Rijn, who is most known previously for directing Bodies, Bodies, Bodies with Amanda Stenberg and Rachel Sennett. The film follows Romy, who is a high-class executive with a loving husband in Antonio Banderas, two funky little children who have a really fun presence in the film. But Romy has been struggling her whole life with the fact that her partners have never been able to make her, because she has a particular set of preferences. The film really kicks off when a young man called Samuel, played by Harris Dickinson, starts an internship in her workplace. They then begin a sexual affair that, for the most part, he is pretty in control of, or at least the person who instigates it. The film follows the ups and downs of this complicated and emotional relationship, and eventually in the third act she confesses to her husband that she has been having an affair. The two men fight it out and things actually work out for Romy. She starts having more open, vulnerable conversations with her husband. Her family life is going well. Samuel is shipped off to work in an office in Tokyo, and the movie finishes with her letting out one big as I've already said, I really liked this movie. I wasn't really sure what to expect. I'm a big fan of erotic cinema, big fan of erotic thrillers. I think the advertising made it seem like it would be more focused on the sort of most intimate part of that dynamic, but a lot of the film is just Romy going about her life and like navigating different interactions with Samuel, with her assistant, with her husband. It's quite slow, it's quite meditative. It doesn't really have a massive climax, which, as I said, has left some disappointed, but the overall journey of the film for me was very satisfying and actually surprisingly emotional. I think the first time I cried was only like 35 minutes in, which is honestly quite embarrassing. It also features one of my favorite horror shots from a non-horror film, which is Nicole Kidman standing timidly in the corner of a hotel room, like the Blair Witch has just sucked out her soul. This moment in the film had everyone in my screening cackling. While it really makes me laugh, I genuinely think there's something very creepy about it. So there was a lot to like about Babygirl, but what truly struck me the most in this film was the absence of male gaze. Male gaze as in the sexualized view of women on screen, not, you know, Lance Bass and Elton John. And before we get going, I'd like to thank the wonderful Wild for partnering with me on this wild video. Time for a quick ad. When I'm heading out to Babygirl the nicer way, one of the most important things to me is that I smell and feel fresh, which is why I use Wild. Wild provides natural, vegan, cruelty-free personal care products that are gentle on all skin, including sensitive skin like mine. They provide the most beautifully scented body washes, lip balms, and deodorants that are scientifically proven to offer 24 hours of protection. Sustainability is really important to me, and the key reason I switched to Wild about 6 months ago was because I loved their reusable cases, which means no single-use plastic, and you can personalize your experience by selecting from a wide variety of cases and refills. If you want to feel good about the planet and yourself, choosing Wild is a guilt-free first step. They ship worldwide with a flexible subscription option, or you can simply buy as you go. So click the link in my description and use my code GIRL2025 for 20% off your entire Wild order for a limited time only. So what is the male gaze? To put it as simply as possible, it is women in film and TV viewed through a male lens. And it was a theory initially devised by feminist theorist Laura Mulvey. As Oxford Language puts it much more articulately than I do, the male gaze is the perspective of a notionally typical heterosexual man considered as embodied in the audience or intended audience for films and other visual media, characterized by a tendency to objectify or sexualize women. Often the male gaze comes down to female bodies shot or costumed in ways that highlight their breasts, their arses, their flat stomachs. It's pure, simple objectification, the cinematic equivalent of a wolf whistle, valuing a woman's appearance and sexual relevance to the men observing them above all. And obviously it's not present in any given film that's directed by a man, but as this is the way of shooting women that was found to be a trend in male-created media, that's why film theorists adopted the title of male gaze. The early 2000s in film and TV is flooded with male gaze. Just think of the famous Carl's Jr. commercials or Megan Fox in Transformers. This version of womanhood on screen was so popular and practically unavoidable. In some ways it still is, setting an unrealistic standard and an expectation to be sexualized and degraded to young women. And if that is male gaze, then what is the female gaze? Again, this is an idea that is argued for and against. Some people don't believe it exists at all. Some people think it exists but is unhelpful. Some people think it is a really important idea we need to introduce into and be more conscious of in cinema. But I would boil it down to the inverse of male gaze. The female gaze is simply showing how women see women. It's viewing women on screen from a female perspective. And this often drastically reduces how much women are sexualized and changes how they are clothed, how they're styled, and how their bodies are shot. Pointedly, and we'll talk about this more throughout, it doesn't mean that there has to be a lack of sexuality, but rather if that is the subject matter, it's looking at that sexuality without being conscious of its appeal to men. This feels like the first place in this discussion that it's important to bring up that obviously men and women aren't homogenous groups. And no one person is destined to depict a woman a certain way on screen because of their gender. Director of last year's The Substance, Coralie Farjat, is really interesting to me because she is someone who often uses male gaze in her films. If you've seen Revenge, her first film, which is a French language film from a few years ago, or if you've seen The Substance, you might notice that there are a lot of shots of women's bodies in those films that feel like they are pulled out of early 2000s media. And she intrigues me because I feel almost certain that she is using this to explore the idea of objectification or to show that the characters within her films are being exploited and objectified, but then as the audience we're still getting served endless shots of Margaret Qualley's whole. There is this constant conflict that rages in films about eroticism between exploiting and exploring the subject matter. Exploitation is described by Oxford Languages as the action or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. Exploitation is about getting something out of something. And the unfair exploitation of women in films often comes down to creating imagery that people enjoy sexually, whether that's subconscious or conscious. The camera takes and it gives something to us. So when you're making erotic cinema or films that are about exploitation specifically, there are some very fine lines to walk in not exploiting your own characters and actors. So how do you avoid that? Well, I think Babygirl did a perfect job. The film begins with a sex scene, and right from the offset, we get an understanding of the way this film is going to be shot. The focus is on Kidman's face. We barely see any of her body. For many of the significant scenes, the actors are actually clothed. And when their body is shown, there isn't a focus on genitalia or specific body parts. The cinematography of the body is so reserved. This film is absolutely not following in the footsteps of Lars von Trier's Nymphomaniac or Gaspar Noé's Love. But you still very much get an impression of what's going on, sometimes through the sound, sometimes through movement that's happening in the background of the scene. It's very obvious what's happening, but you don't actually have to see it all, and you don't see it all. Even when there is full nudity in the film, and we do get a scene of full nudity from Kidman, it's a very vulnerable moment. And I think this is significant that this is pretty much the only place that they chose to show her fully nude. She's not poised, she's not positioned or posed in a way that makes her back arch or her arse stick out. She feels vulnerable in the scene, and I feel that the camera respects that. I love that at no point this film felt like a screenshot of pornography, and I feel like that separates it from other similar stuff, films about female desire that I would consider to be exploitative. I know some people complained about the film not being sexy, which I partially think comes down to the way it was advertised. Like, I definitely thought it was going to be a film that would leave my seat damp, but it wasn't. Rather, it left my cheeks damp, for it was a bit of a tearjerker. I think some people were also gutted that it wasn't a better exploration of kink, that it wasn't more extreme, that it was too vanilla. And I do understand these complaints, because I think there is a yearning from the kink community for a mainstream film that handles BDSM after the total failure that was 50 Shades of Grey, and how tragically that handled the material. There isn't really any good media that I'm aware of anyway, anything in the mainstream about kink. And I think possibly people thought that this was finally going to be its like moment in the spotlight. And I also understand that there is just this general yearning at the moment for sexy, silly fun and for fantasy with the popularity of smut. But this film isn't a fantasy, and I think that's the big divide. It's a film about fantasy, and that's something very different. Another element that I think plays into what I would consider the female gaze of this film is the awkwardness of the scenes. The first scene of Romy and Samuel meeting in the hotel room is so off-kilter and kind of tense, but not because there's an unbreakable sexual tension, but because both characters don't really seem to know what they're doing. And this ends up being almost frightening, and equally very funny. I know someone who posted on Instagram saying that they didn't know Babygirl was a horror movie, and I feel like they must have been talking about this scene. The awkwardness of this scene arises because Romy and Samuel don't have the confidence of two people performing a fantasy for others, whether that be for us or for each other. They have the reserved uncertainty of people trying to do something that is weird and unnatural. There are various other scenes where they talk over each other, they stutter, where one or both of them break into an awkward giggle, where Samuel points out that Romy is sweating and he tells her that she's old. There are lots of parts in this that are not sexy. In fact, there are some parts in this which will haunt me for years. I feel this is another signifier of the female gaze, that the film is not protective over the characters' sexual appeal. Basically, the director doesn't feel like Romy has to be sexy, coy, poised, in control, showing body, any of the things that we typically associate with a confident and sexually attractive woman. In a film that was trying to create a fantasy for the audience, or perhaps one restrained by the male gaze, we wouldn't be allowed in on this. The reality of kink, the reality of sex, it is awkward, and so rarely do two people have the confidence to do it well. And these scenes represent that so perfectly. And it isn't just Romy who is uncertain and out of her comfort zone. While Samuel does instigate and often state the parameters of their arrangements, this boy is a mess. He's not a Christian Grey with all his life under control and simply the scent of a dark past behind him. He's not an Edward Cullen with a sense of solitude and authority. He's a very visibly fallible person who doesn't really understand what he's doing. Also, I am embarrassed by my literary references. Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. Please give me better examples in the comments of sexy, confident men in movies, because I know they exist. Romy may have far more to lose, but Samuel isn't really in control because he's not in control of himself. His very wobbly grasp of consent tells you enough about who he is from the start, and we're shown throughout that Samuel is selfish, impulsive, careless, and lost. Not in a sexy, mysterious past way, and certainly not the kind of person that you can entrust your incredibly vulnerable desires with. And ultimately their dangerous game fumbles because the pair aren't actually doing it well within clear parameters. I'm not exactly sure where to work this into the video, but one moment that really stood out to me was Romy crying in Samuel's arms after eating sweets out of his hands, and then I believe having the first that she's had with a man in real life. I'm not this awkward about saying the word in real life. I just don't know if I'm allowed to say it on YouTube. I found this moment really heartbreaking because even though she's had this sensual breakthrough experience, she's aware of how fucked up it all is. Not the kink itself, but having to go to such great lengths to feel something. I felt for her that to get what she wants, she had to put herself in such an awkward, bizarre, and dangerous situation. And again, we don't often see that side of characters like Romy. The gist is that all this awkwardness and humor allowed it to truly feel real. It's not a fantasy, it's acting out a fantasy. And that's a really, really key difference. Demonstrably, the difference between Babygirl and other films about female desire is that the scenes in Babygirl don't attempt to arouse their viewers as they arouse their characters. The fantasy, the kink, it's not for us, it's for Romy. Also, I am aware that for some people this film will still feel like a lot of like I wouldn't exactly watch it with your mum and dad, but it's operating on an intellectual level. If it wanted to go there, it could, but it's choosing not to. Instead, it's showing intimacy in a far less glamorous, attractive light. And effectively, the filmmakers are doing everything in their power not to create All the and body stuff aside, there's so much more to this idea of the female gaze that is found in Babygirl. I hate the fact that I have to say Babygirl every time I say Babygirl. I think one of the biggest things here, and I guess the idea honestly that I'm driving towards with everything that I'm saying, is that it's cracking this illusion. It's cracking the illusion of what womanhood is supposed to be viewed through the lens that we've collectively been viewing it as a society. I hate to do the whole we live in a society thing, but we have such specific parameters in which we maintain this idea of acceptable womanhood, and particularly attractive, sexually attractive, acceptable womanhood. One of the things that I really loved in this movie that kind of broke that was that we see this montage of her beauty procedures. We see her get Botox and doing cryotherapy and a few other things. And I was so interested that they chose to do that and appreciated so much that they're letting us in a way actually into Nicole Kidman's own sort of maintaining of this illusion, but just within the context of the film, letting us in on how Romy maintains this illusion that she is this perfect, unshakable, beautiful woman. I love also that she has an interesting past with a few allusions to her having grown up in a sect or a cult. And what I liked most about this is the fact that it is not used to explain her sexual kinks. I know for some people this is something that didn't work at all, and felt shoehorned in. But I interpreted the inclusion of this as an intentional red herring. We, the audience, might find ourselves assuming throughout the film that this is why she is the way she is. And she has a line of dialogue where she actually says, I thought that was why I am the way I am, but it's not. I found that inclusion to be an interesting nod to the idea that you often see in other films, that you have to have a fucked up past to be a fucked up person, or that you have to have some kind of incident or trauma or messed up childhood in order to develop unconventional desires. Once again, Babygirl destroys the cinematic fantasy and shows us how it actually is a lot of the time, which is just, you are the way you are. I also really enjoyed in Romy how often she is vulnerable and unable to kind of play the game. And because this vulnerability and those failures aren't shown in combination with her being sexualized by the camera, it doesn't feel like a humiliation. Specifically, a humiliation that is gratifying for the audience, like Nomi's lap dance in Showgirls. I've been thinking a lot about what it is to objectify and humiliate female characters recently, because I'm working on a video about Paul Verhoeven and feel that he does this to his women a lot. They either must be calculated in control or they must be constantly humiliated. To me, Babygirl avoids both of these damaged woman stereotypes. Unlike the way Verhoeven often handles his female characters, where they have this kind of wink at the camera towards the end of the film as if to say that they were in control the whole time or unimaginably twisted more so than their male counterparts, Romy actually has a drawn out and exposed experience of losing control and finding herself within that and understanding what is truly valuable to her and how to get it. She wins because she actually goes on a journey and learns something and makes a change, not just because she's a femme fatale for whom winning and retaining ultimate control is fundamental to her appeal. Part and parcel to this, I loved the scene of Romy asking her husband to try some sexy stuff with her, and she's so awkward about it, hiding under that little sheet like a ghost. That felt so real, because she's not confident and assertive in her desires because she doesn't know how to really enact them either, and she doesn't know how to ask for them. She only knows how to observe it. And that, again, I think separates her from these kind of femme fatale types who are completely confident, completely able to either ask for what, who are completely confident, completely able to either ask for what they want or to just do it. Romy is a real woman, completely uncertain of how to ask for what she knows she wants because she's embarrassed. One film I've seen Babygirl getting compared to a lot is Michael Haneke's The Piano Teacher. And I love that film, and both can be good. But in many ways, I'm actually more interested in Babygirl, which I feel is probably cinema sacrilege, because it's not simply a brilliant film that is observing a woman and all of her complexities, but a brilliant film exploring female desire from the inside out. And films about female desire are horrifyingly few and far between. I really don't want to make this into a men versus women kind of argument, because despite the comments on my companion review, I truly don't believe in being divisive. But it's so nice to watch a film made by a woman. And so nice to watch a film. Obviously, again, like, women are not one homogenous group, but it's so nice to watch a film exploring a singular female psyche, knowing that it was actually created by a female filmmaker. Even if it is only one woman's perspective and representative of no one else, it is a woman's perspective and a woman's exploration of those ideas. Elle, The Piano Teacher, Secretary, so many of the successful and applauded films in the sort of dark female desire genre are directed by men. And it's great as a viewer and lover of this genre to see myself as not just the subject, but the architect for once. As my friend Ari rightfully said, finally, a film written by a woman. I cannot finish this video without talking about the end of the movie. And the end of the movie, I think, has been somewhat controversial, not in the sense of any actual controversy, but simply that it seems to be the point in the film where a lot of people split off into this is a 4-star movie or this is a 2-star movie. Judging from what I have read of other people's reviews, a lot of people were pretty disappointed in the third act, either kind of feeling that the film had set up stuff that wasn't really resolved in an exciting climax, or people just feeling that the film never really set that much up to start with and didn't have anywhere to go. I liked the ending. However, you are not wrong if you agree with anything else I just said. I think it is perfectly fair to argue that the end of this film wasn't particularly successful, but also it's just a movie and you're either gonna like it or you're not, and I liked it. And one of the things that I did like about it was that we actually got to see Romy get her happy ending. It may have not been the most realistic ending for a character who has arguably done quite a lot of terrible things in this movie to be forgiven by her husband and children, and if anything actually seemed to reinvigorate Antonio Banderas in his own desires. But I thought it was really nice to see an ending in a film like this that allows people to feel like they're not broken, and that it actually is a hopeful world for kinky little freaks like that. But what I think is really interesting about this ending is that I see it as the true fantasy of the film. It's not all the stuff, it's not the BDSM, it's not the power play. The real fantasy at play in this movie is the hope that you can have it all. To have a partner who understands your darkest desires, to have sexual satisfaction while retaining traditional family values, to have loving children, a stable job, but also to be seen where it matters most, to be understood as a whole person. This is the real fantasy of Babygirl. It is not one that is erotic, but one that is hopeful. So, with everything from the substance to showgirls, I've been thinking a lot about what the female gaze really is. But I think with Babygirl, I finally pinpointed, at least to me, what a film about and eroticism and femininity actually looks like when the male gaze is stripped away. This is it. This is the female gaze, and I applaud Helena Rhine for bringing that to life.